This episode of the Topcast is proudly supported by Piano Marvel.
I like to think about it as like the teacher is the artisan of a student's musical learning journey. This is going to sound really cheesy, but but I've used this example before where if you kind of hire like a woodworker to create a custom cabinet for your house, it is highly unlikely that they are going to like hand forge metal hinges for your cabinet or like carve a knob. They're going to go to the hardware store and they're going to choose something that matches your house and your style and what you want, and they're going to personally build that cabinet to the dimensions that fit in your space. So it's personal, but they're going to use the tools available to them. And I think that way about method books and teaching tools and all of the other things that we use in our teaching. It's tools in our toolbox, and we're kind of the artisans of our students' musical learning journeys. So that's kind of how I think about it.
You're listening to the Topcast, the original podcast for growth-minded instrumental music and voice teachers since 2015, with your host, Tim Topham. Our mission at Top Music is to empower instrumental music and voice teachers to find and nurture their innate creativity so that they can teach lessons that are innovative, integrated, and inspiring, and that will have a positive lifelong impact on their students. Join us each week as we interview teachers and creators from around the world and unpack fun and exciting ideas to maximize your teaching and studio business success. Tim Topham here, and welcome back to the Topcast. Thanks so much for joining me again for another episode. Today, we are presenting an episode that I actually hoped we would be able to feature last month when the focus in July 2025 was all about repertoire. My guest today has actually created a resource to help teachers navigate, particularly piano methods. I mean, we have access, don't we, to probably hundreds, definitely tens, maybe 30, 40, 50 different piano methods, maybe not hundreds. How on earth are we expected to know which ones to use with which students and what they all are, whether they're good or bad, how they actually approach where you start learning, reading, which notes to read, all of those kinds of things? Do you get tired of wasting time and money on sheet music just to find one decent piece your students might really enjoy? What if the perfect new repertoire collection arrived in your inbox every month, handpicked, level appropriate, and ready to teach? Well, that's exactly what you get with Top Music Sheets. Each month, our members get exclusive access to a fresh, themed collection of sheet music from some of the most popular composers in the world, from early elementary to intermediate and beyond. Here's a taste of one of the pieces from this month's collection. Want instant access to the full collection and next month's too? Become a Top Music Pro member today and join thousands of teachers who've stopped wasting money on books they never use. Available on our light plan for just $10 a month. Head to topmusicsheets.com to find out more. My guest today has actually created some software that helps you actually navigate all these piano methods. It's called Piano Method Navigator. And that's what we're talking about with our guest today, ABR, Anna Beth Rucker. She's a pianist, educator, and the creator of Piano Method Navigator, a free online tool that helps teachers explore method books with clarity and confidence. With nearly 2 decades of teaching experience and 2 degrees in pedagogy, she brings both depth and curiosity to piano education. In addition to her work in music, she's spent years in the non-profit sector, designing strategy, streamlining operations, and shaping messaging. She now leads Tree Frog Solutions, a refreshingly straightforward consulting firm that helps nonprofits and creative businesses do things on a small budget. She lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband Ben, their goofy golden retriever Clive, and their 3-legged cat, Charles Francois. Well, welcome to the show, ABR. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm just thrilled to be here.
Now, I have called you ABR. That is what you like to go by, Anna Beth Rucker.
That's true. That is true.
It's a little bit unusual for me, but you were telling me actually it's kind of comes from a medical terminology which your husband uses.
That's true. Yeah. It's kind of like a fun thing that sort of junior residents do to refer to older, wiser doctors, I guess. And when we started dating, he started calling me that, and it just stuck like literally everywhere, professionally, friend groups, everybody.
Right. Well, I'm more than happy to use it as well. Thank you for being here. I thought, why don't we kick it off? Of course, this is Repertoire Month here at Top Music. So we're talking about repertoire and method books and things like that, particularly today because you've got a lot of experience in this area. What's your perspective on how method books fit into the broader conversation about repertoire in general?
It's a great question. And I think about that a lot because I'm, deep in the weeds on, on method books these days. And I really view method books as sort of a pathway to repertoire, whether that's the repertoire inside of the method books. I mean, it's a very classic thing where you have a concept introduced and then there's a piece of repertoire that you get to experience that concept through. But ultimately, like the reason that we use method books is to help students get a foundation of music learning so that they can play all kinds of repertoire, alongside method books. Or eventually, the hope and the dream is that the student graduates out of the method book and they're released into the wild world of advanced repertoire. so they're just kind of like a helpful framework to get students there. And I think kind of to highlight that the teacher really directs that journey all the way through. It goes past even a method book because you're deciding on repertoire they're going to play, throughout their musical career. And I think it kind of fits along with what my general teaching philosophy is, which is probably a good thing to touch on just sort of as we enter in this conversation, which is kind of a three-pronged approach that I have for myself, which that I always want my teaching to be sort of teacher forward. So like the teacher is the method, always reminding myself that methods are really helpful, but they're not kind of the end of teaching, right? And then student-centered, which I think is pretty obvious to everyone. But of course, we want our teaching to be adaptive to our students' strengths and their struggles and their interests and all of that. And then also creativity focused. So I hope that my teaching is adaptive enough or creative enough, I guess I should say, to be adaptive to the unique student. And also, I want it to be informed by the content. Like I'm teaching music and music is inherently creative and artistic. And I hope my teaching reflects that,
Well, I'm 100% in agreement on the, especially the student-centered kind of focus. That's one of our 4 pillars here at Top Music. That's what we're all about. I think it is super critical. And I was talking to Dr. Merlin Thompson in another podcast about curriculum models. And one of his was a student, you can either be kind of teacher-focused, you direct everything, or student-focused, they direct everything, or more of shared. So it's really interesting that we're kind of covering some of those same elements. But you said the words teacher is the method. What does that mean?
Yes, I cannot take credit for that, of course. I was curious about that because I heard that in my pedagogy training for years and years. And I was like, where does that even come from?
It's kind of ringing a bell in the back of my mind, but I'm not sure.
Maybe somewhere in the far recesses. Yeah. Yeah, I actually kind of did a deep dive on that several years ago because I was kind of curious about it. And I think it actually originates in like general education. And it was tied to something called holism theory, which I'm going to butcher, like trying to explain, but it's kind of like the simplified version is that the sum is greater than the parts, which is, something we all have heard, but it's a little bit more nuanced in the sense that like these individual parts have uniqueness, but they can't be separated from the whole. And in the teaching realm, that kind of meant that who the teacher is and their personality and what they bring to the table, like, is inextricably linked to the content that they're teaching, even if the content, is something entirely different. And that's not generally how we use it in piano pedagogy these days, but I think it's actually a really important thing to bring up because that's part of adaptive teaching is knowing yourself well enough to know, this is my personality and this is what I bring to the table. And these are things that I struggle with. And that is going to affect the way that I teach, just inherently. But I've heard it more in pedagogy circles to mean kind of like, I like to think about it as like the teacher is the artisan of a student's musical learning journey. This is going to sound really cheesy, but but I've used this example before where if you kind of hire like a woodworker to create a custom cabinet for your house, it is highly unlikely that they are going to like hand forge metal hinges for your cabinet or like carve a knob. They're going to go to the hardware store and they're going to choose something that matches your house and your style and what you want. And they're going to personally build that cabinet to the dimensions that fit in your space. So it's personal, but they're going to use the tools available to them. And I think that way about method books and teaching tools and all of the other things that we use in our teaching. It's tools in our toolbox, and we're kind of the artisans of our students' musical learning journeys. So that's kind of how I think about it.
I actually really like that. We hear the word artisan thrown around a lot in sort of restaurants and bakeries and patisseries and things like artisan bakehouse and stuff like that. But I haven't heard it used in this way. But I actually really like that craftsman analogy. I think that's actually quite clever. Where, yeah, the craftsman or us, we have lots of say. We decide the direction. We decide the final outlook, how it works, how it looks by interacting with you and finding out what you want, i.e. the student or the parent. But we use hinges, we use a method book, we use knobs, that's repertoire, or whatever it is, these things that are put out there. And unfortunately, we're almost overwhelmed a lot of the time with all of the hinges and knobs that we can use, right? There is so much out there.
It's a lot easier to go to like IKEA or somewhere and get something that has everything inside of it already and just kind of like put it together, right? But that might not be the right thing for that space. And that's kind of how I think about, I don't want to just teach out of a method book page to page to page and hope that it just works for everyone, right? So yeah, it's kind of cheesy, but I like it.
No, I like it. Just before we go on, could you just tell us quickly about your studio, sort of at what students you teach and how many and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So right now I don't have any students.
Oh, okay.
Kind of crazy. No, but I've taught for a long time. This is the first time in my career I haven't been teaching. It's just because of a lot of moves that have happened recently and being in a new place and whatnot. But I am planning to open my studio back up. I actually already have a wait list, which I'm so fortunate to have in a new city. But just people kind of find out that you're a piano teacher and they're like, wait, I have children, So this fall I'll start teaching again, which I'm really excited about. But yeah.
And in the past, have you tended towards mainly, given your obviously interest in method books, and I'm going to talk more about that in a moment, did you mainly teach beginners or have you taught right across the spectrum?
I've taught pretty much right across the spectrum. I mean, I've taught from kind of pre-method book students to, I think my oldest student was maybe 74 or something like that. And then I've taught in all different kinds of settings, one-on-one. I've taught in group settings. I've taught in community music school settings, taught in my home, taught during graduate school, and just all different kinds of things, which has been really, really fun. I actually also taught general music education in schools for a while as well. So that was a very different experience than teaching piano.
You and me both.
Yes. Yeah, very different. It's a lot of corralling, but it's super fun. So yeah, it's been a whole variety of things, and I've been fortunate to have that experience.
Yeah, and I think people who have that wide variety of experience like you've had, I think that really brings something to the table when it comes to what you can offer both your students but also other teachers in the case of some of the projects that you've got going at the moment. Now, you've actually got 2 degrees in pedagogy. So what made you realize that there was still something missing when it came to your understanding of and knowledge of method books?
Yeah, it's kind of wild, actually, but I think it's probably will be relatable to a lot of people. My background, yeah, is in piano education. I have multiple degrees. I've taught for many years. I kind of realized when I was formulating all of these thoughts about method books a few years ago, wow, like I have a lot of varied experiences, and I'm actually feeling pretty overwhelmed at the amount of things that are out there and how little I feel like I know. And I kind of got to know things through different avenues. I knew the method books that I had grown up learning with, which was the Bastian Piano Basics and Alfred's Basic Piano Library, kind of a hybrid of those two. And I had been teaching out of those, in my earlier career because that's just what I knew. And then in undergrad, I was really fortunate to study with Dr. Carrie Carlin, who is someone who studied with Francis Clark at the New School in New Jersey. And she and Louise Goss were the ones who originally wrote the music tree method. And so I did a really, really deep dive on that method in undergrad, was teaching out of that for many years. And that was extremely formative. I mean, to learn that method so well in that setting, which, if you know the method, it's so pedagogically sound. And it was a real hoot to be like watching, VHS tapes of Francis. She's a real hoot of a person, and that probably ages me. But it was just a really wonderful experience to have such a direct tie to that legacy, which not related to method books, but I ended up working for the Francis Clark Center for about 6 years, which was a nice, like, kind of full circle moment for me, just kind of coming out of that from undergrad. And then I also, for a period of time, taught at the Faber Piano Institute in Ann Arbor, Michigan for Randy and Nancy Faber. Obviously got to know their books very well through that process. And another very formative experience. I mean, to be connected with them and to learn from them. And to know those books on like such a deep level at the source was a real privilege. And I say all that to say, even with all of those really wonderful experiences that I'm so thankful for, I still looked around. I thought, holy cow, there's so much and more coming. And how do I know all of these things? And I kind of had this sense that it would be helpful to my students if I was more knowledgeable at a deep enough level that I can make it adaptive in my teaching. But yeah, I just felt kind of overwhelmed. I think we've seen such a surge in method books even in the last few years. So
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be nodding along, listening and going, oh my goodness, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how I could possibly understand all these methods. I mean, there's been a proliferation of method books in the last 50 years. And we actually have a method book of the month here at Top Music where we interview authors and dive deeply. And we've been going for probably a year or more and we're still going. Like there's no shortage of new method books to cover. Why do you think there's still new ones coming out at the moment? Why do you think this is? Because 20, 30 years ago, there was maybe 5 key ones, 4.
yeah, you had a handful of options, right? That is not the case anymore. Yeah, first of all, I think that idea is wonderful. I love that you have been doing that. And I would love to see a list of those methods because I'm always very curious about things that are happening that I may not know about. And what a service to teachers. Because again, like we're all overwhelmed out here. we need help. But yeah, no, I think we are in a moment of expansion. And I don't consider myself like an expert in method book history, but I have spent a lot of time recently, thinking about these things. And I think a lot of it comes down to accessibility, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I think there are kind of multiple parts, but we've seen kind of a big evolution in how method books appear to us, I would say. And I use evolution very lightly because I don't actually think we're in a more sophisticated place. I think you can teach from the earliest method books and they're valuable and might be the right thing for the right student. I think about something like the John Thompson books, which were one of the first like structured method book series in the States. And I think they came out in like the 30s, like 1936 or something.
I was taught with it.
Oh, really? Yeah, they're quite old.
Yeah, I know.
No, I'm kidding. But no, they're like one of the first kind of method books that were available, widely available at least. And they're so different than what we have today. I mean, they're extremely, well, I think comparatively to what we have now, extremely quickly paced. They're very repertoire heavy. They don't have a lot of help for teachers in terms of like how to teach things. It's kind of just, here's the concept and hope you know how to teach it, And there's no like colorful cartoons and fun activities and like they're just very different. And I think there's actually a lot of value to those methods. I mean, depending on who your student is. And then we kind of see this evolution where in the mid-century we get things like the Bastian books and the music tree, which start to have a little bit more of they're kind of getting at a more instructional vibe. Like there is some support for teachers. There's more engagement for the kids. There's like some pictures and activities and things like that. And they're also different conversation, but they're also revolutionary in other ways of pacing and reading approach and all of those other things. But my point is that they are starting to become a little bit more accessible, both for teachers and for students. And then you see in the 80s and the 90s, big powerhouses like, Hal Leonard and Faber, and they're starting to try to do like this comprehensive approach of method books, which is, not only are we ramping up activities and fun pictures and like the tone of the books to be more kid friendly and like all of those supplemental materials and like all of that stuff, but they're adding in an incredible amount of support for teachers. And I think the effect is that it sort of raised the bar of teaching across the board. You mentioned at the beginning, my husband is in medicine, and I kind of think about that a lot, actually, in terms of there's a governing board of people, and the general public wants this, that is telling you, like, are you qualified to be a surgeon or not? And we need that because it's life or death.
Happy with that.
Yeah, exactly. In music, we don't have that, which is great. It's actually a beautiful thing because music is not in those terms, life or death. In other terms, it's extremely life-giving. And I think for that reason, it's actually great that there's a really low barrier of entry for people to learn music and to teach music. But, that kind of also has its pros and cons where you have people teaching who maybe don't have a degree in pedagogy or maybe don't have years of teaching. And I think, I'm so excited that they are. I think any way you can learn music from anyone you can, you should. But things like these method books kind of help them teach at a level they might not be able to otherwise. So that's kind of like the exciting part of it. Anyway, there is a thread here. I'm going to bring it back. So today, I think we have even more expansion on accessibility. One, because we have more people teaching piano than ever before because they're more supported. And I think also it's more accessible to young students. And so people are excited and staying engaged, like the kids are excited and staying engaged. I think also we're in the digital age. So the method by which you create and disseminate method books is so much easier now than it used to be. And we see, classic kind of books as well as new books capitalizing on that and coming out with ebooks or apps or YouTube channels or online courses or like all kinds of things that you can do in the digital space. Obviously you're a huge example of that, of getting things into teachers' hands in a really accessible way. And that, you think about what it took to publish in maybe the 50s or even the 80s. And it was a big deal. Like you probably had to be somebody, an educator, a performer or something to even get a contract with a publisher. And then you had to like hand engrave the music and market it in a music store, like a physical space, a music store. And now like anyone who has an idea can create a framework. They can use a free notation software to get it on a page. They can like sell it online. It's just the marketplace is so much different. It's so much easier to enter it now. I think that's a huge reason that it's just to create one is more accessible. And then the very last thing, sorry, like I know I've been like chatting here, but the very last thing is that I think we're also seeing accessibility in terms of how students learn. So we're seeing a lot of different foundational techniques. So something like Piano Safari, which is very rote teaching based at the beginning, which is very different than what we have traditionally, which is a much more like note reading forward approach. Or Music Moves for Piano is one that is based on the Edward Gordon music learning theory technique. And that's a very different approach. And so, yeah, I think there's like all of these different channels of accessibility. And those are big reasons why we're seeing so many method books and methodologies kind of come out.
And we also have methods for neurodiverse students. I mean, that's another sort of area that's expanded too. I was thinking as you were speaking, I wonder whether there were in the past just as many teachers creating and using their own methods as there are today. It's just that, as you say, it's now accessible that anyone can kind of put it together and get it out there. Because I think teachers are pretty creative in many ways in the approach that they use.
100%. Yeah. And I also wonder, some of these methods we point to as like the big guys are like, oh, like they really revolutionized in this way or that way. And the more I look at the history, the more I think, wow, this community evolved together. Like it's hard to pinpoint like who did something first sometimes, not to, take away from other people's accomplishments. But like you said, piano teachers are so creative and they're so smart. And I think a lot of this was probably happening. It was just really hard to get it to other people.
Nicola Canton actually did a short podcast, or it might have been a YouTube video not long ago. I don't know if you saw it, on method books and how they came about. Quite interesting. She did a bit of history and research. Yeah, you should check that out.
I will check it out.
Because I was listening, because I wrote a bit about it in my Notebook Beginners about why we went to the reading thing first and that whole history. So I was quite interested in history too, but she sort of tried to work out as best she could, when did these methods actually come onto the market and why? And so, yeah, thought you might be interested in that.
That would be very interesting, because you do see a real leap from like, even late 1800s to early 1900s. It seems like things shifted so much in such a short amount of time. So anyway, I'll check it out. That sounds really interesting.
Absolutely. So do you think there is still a place for teachers using one method book in their studio for all their students, or is that really, we've just moved on from that?
I think there is. And I say that partly because I think a lot of people still do that. And there are obviously still great pianists who are coming up, right? I think if it wasn't working for the last 50 years, we would have noticed. And also, I kind of am sympathetic to that framework, because ultimately, I think most piano teachers don't have a lot of time. And if something is working for them, like it's working. And certainly, we can all strive to be better in different ways, but I kind of relate to that, and I've been there, and I'm sure I'll be there again at some point, And also I think there's again, going back to kind of barrier of entry, but in a different way, like it takes a really long time to get to know a method book series really well. And so it's kind of that like risk reward thing of like, is this going to be helpful enough to my students that it makes it worth spending the time and the resources to get to know more methods, you know? And I hope that there are ways to do that, which is foreshadowing, but but I think, you know, it really does, my opinion is that being able to be flexible across method books and other things, teaching tools, frameworks, repertoire, whatever, is really important for your students' musical journey. And also, there are really practical reasons why it's important. You know, if you have a student and a method book just isn't working for them for whatever reason, the tone is off, it's moving too fast, it's moving too slow, the repertoire isn't something they're interested in, whatever it is, and they end up, you know, quitting lessons because they lost interest, like that's a real problem for you, you know? So I think, you know, it's both for the student, but there are practical things to think about as well.
Piano Marvel is the ultimate teaching companion for modern piano educators. Whether you're teaching in person, online, or in hybrid settings, Piano Marvel makes it easy to engage students, track their progress, and accelerate learning. Just connect a digital piano via USB or MIDI to a laptop, tablet, or smartphone to unlock interactive lessons, instant feedback, and over 30,000 songs and exercises. No MIDI? No problem. Students can still get feedback using just their acoustic piano or keyboard and Piano Marvel's microphone assessment tool, ideal for beginners. Save time with easy-to-assign pieces, progress tracking, and built-in sight-reading assessments using the unique SASR test. Students stay motivated with fun challenges, clear goals, and an enormous library of music they'll love. And try out the new Group Play feature designed for teaching group lessons and playing ensembles in perfect time. Engage your students, maximize your teaching, revolutionize your studio with Piano Marvel. To learn more, visit pianomarvel.com. So you've obviously spent a lot of time doing research into methods, culminating in your Piano Method Navigator. And we'll talk about that in a minute, which is going to be really fun. But first, in all of your research, was there anything that really surprised you as you got deeper into comparing these method books?
Definitely. There are a lot of things, but I think the two that I'll share, one is kind of about me and one is more about the books. And so the one about me is, to be totally honest, I realized that I was extremely biased and had a lot of opinions and wasn't even really aware of that in certain ways. And I don't think bias is wrong. I think we all have bias about all kinds of things. But it's important to kind of be self-aware about that. And, you know, I have my life experiences. I was taught by certain people. I've worked for different organizations, whatever. All of those things kind of culminated in I had opinions about like, this is the best method, or like, this is how you should teach note reading, or like, I don't know, whatever the things are. And, you know, while I still have certainly preferences based on myself and my students, I think just kind of getting to know on a much deeper level so many more method books, I not just like appreciated all of the different ways you can teach things, but I began to kind of celebrate the diversity of ways that you can teach something, and kind of was like, oh, like this could actually be really helpful for my students if I'm open to the possibilities of these things, because they may learn it better from a different perspective rather than kind of being like, well, you know, I know from my pedagogy degree that this or that, like that's not helpful. It's just not helpful.
And sometimes you might be teaching something that you've taught a million times to one student the same way, and it just doesn't click. And so you need to have that, some alternatives. That's good teaching.
No, exactly. In fact, I was just talking to my husband about that earlier today, completely unrelated to teaching. But I was like, I'm realizing that when I talk to someone, I explain the same thing 3 different ways. And like, usually like a normal human adult about a normal human conversation will understand it the first time. I don't need to add the other 2, but I'm so trained to try to come at things from different angles for my students that it bleeds over into my, you know, regular life. The thing about the method books themselves was that I was really surprised how complex the comparisons ended up being, both pedagogically and just kind of practically. Because at first I thought I was just sort of like building this spreadsheet and I was going to do some simple matching, whatever. And I quickly realized that there's like a lot of gray area.
So many, yeah. Yep.
And, you know, how one method book introduces a seemingly simple concept can be so different than how another method book does. You know, is it very formally introduced, or is it just kind of mentioned in passing and we don't really talk about it that much? Something like, I'm trying to think of an example, like a 5/7 chord. A lot of method books introduce it as a 2-note chord, whereas another method book might introduce the 4-note version and also be explicitly talking about inversions, whereas, this other student is technically learning an inversion, but they don't know that yet. So I was really getting in the weeds on some of these things, and also kind of sitting back and thinking, does this even matter? Is there a way that I need to communicate this to teachers? Like, is this something important that they need to know is a difference? Or like, maybe I'm just like so far into the weeds on this that I have realized
I can't see the sky anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there is just like a lot of pedagogical discernment that I wasn't expecting, but became very rewarding. I was like, oh, well, this is interesting, but complicated. So, and then, practically it was just like so much work to compare every page of every book of every method to every page of every book of every other method. And I was doing it manually, and eventually was like, okay, I have to like figure out some way to automate some of this.
System.
So, exactly. Yeah. So I ended up like teaching myself enough Python to like code some simple automations, and ChatGPT helped me kind of figure some of that out. And that saved a lot of time. But, obviously you can't teach a machine to decide if a 5/7 chord equals another 5/7 chord. So
Right.
There's still a lot of pedagogical work that went into it.
Yeah, I almost, by the stage you got to, would have just thrown up my hands and gone, okay, this is too hard. Because I've tried to do something similar with exam boards, which are really popular over here in Australia and the United Kingdom. There are more and more exam boards growing all the time. There are probably in Australia, you've probably got a choice of maybe 20, and 30 years ago there was one, maybe two. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to compare them. Let's compare what they all require and what do their oral tests require and and it's so complicated because you're right. There are so many permutations and combinations and little differences. And so I'm pretty impressed that you continued with it. Anyway, I just wanted to know, with the work that you've done, are most method books, if we look at them practically, are they pretty subtle kind of variations on the same theme, or are some, in your opinion, pretty revolutionary? And if so, which ones? Like, I think you mentioned Piano Safari, for example, just starting with rote. That was probably the first that I remember. It would have come out about 2011 or 13-ish. And I remember that was a bit of a sort of a shock, I guess, in a good way.
Yeah, definitely. I think to answer the first part of the question, are they just subtle variations kind of on the same theme? One side of that is that no method book is perfect. I think it's important to say, like, they all have gaps. But having said that, I think probably any method book that's on the market right now, including the ones that go back to, the early 1900s, they're all going to cover pretty much everything we consider fundamentals. So in that way, yes, I think they're kind of variations on a theme. I think the real question is around, like, are the variations important and how so? Like, does it matter that there are variations, or like do the differences matter that much? And I think the answer is yes. In terms of concept pacing and strategy, like I was just mentioning, they're quite different in a variety of ways. And that's a big part of Piano Method Navigator right now, is just that pacing and strategy. But what I kind of didn't expect as I looked at all of these is that the tone is quite different in many of them. So how they talk about things, what they include, the graphics of the photos, the kind of relationship they're encouraging between the teacher and the student, the repertoire they choose, that's obviously a huge one. There's just so many things that kind of come together to make an overall tone really among the entire series, and those can be quite different. And I think that makes a really big difference for students, kind of what I alluded to earlier, which is that can make or break whether a student is engaging in their music learning journey. So yeah, I think even though variations on a theme, I think the variations can be really important. In terms of revolutionary, I think you're right. I think Piano Safari is one that comes to mind with the rote learning. Music Tree, I think, was the first method book series that used intervallic reading rather than kind of note name or finger-oriented note reading, which was a really big deal. And a lot of other methods have now kind of incorporated that. I think kind of the Faber Piano Adventures looms large in terms of like that comprehensive, I should say, layering system of support for teachers, and just the breadth of supplemental material they have is, I don't know if it's unmatched. I think Hal Leonard also has a lot. There's some other ones too, but that kind of looms large, I think, in my mind, in terms of they were one of the original ones to do it. So,
and very accessible, I think. I think that's why it's so popular, because as you said earlier, if you don't have a whole lot of training, but maybe you're quite experienced as a player yourself, it does answer a lot of questions and bridge a lot of gaps. I think that one, it's quite approachable. It's not, whereas you look at something like, I tried Music Tree. I found it was a bit of a leap for me. And then something like Music Moves for Piano, huge leap, way too far. Like, that's really different. I mean, it's great for those who love it, and I understand the concepts behind it, but it is really different. So I think there's also that when it comes to methods and approachability, I think there's a conversation there too.
Oh, for sure. And that's something I actually have just gotten in contact with the Music Moves for Piano folks, and they've been really kind to like connect me with some other teachers, because I want to represent, the widest breadth of methods I can on Piano Method Navigator. But to your point, it is very different than something more traditional like a Music Tree or a Faber or Bastion or something like that. And so trying to make recommendations in terms of like transitioning between methods or how do these relate, it's a lot more difficult for something like that. And yeah, it's an interesting conversation about like how would that even be part of your adaptive teaching?
Have you met with or connected with Krista Yadro?
Yes,
yeah,
I have.
Fantastic. Yeah. She runs courses on Music Moves for Piano. So I thought that'd be a good connection. All right. Well, you'd better tell us about this Piano Method Navigator. So what is it and who's it for?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so Piano Method Navigator is a tool, I guess a series of tools that I created, web-based, and they're intended for busy piano teachers who are trying to explore and confidently use, multiple series of method books. I know that teachers don't have time to be like personally flipping through every page of every method book. So I wanted to try to create something that did that for you and gave you all the information that you need to make decisions for yourself and for your students. So it's completely free. I wanted it to be accessible, speaking of accessibility, to any teacher, whether you're first starting out or you've been teaching for 30 years. It's just kind of a passion project and academic contribution. So that's what Piano Method Navigator is.
And is it something that you set out to build for yourself and then you thought, oh, this could be helpful for others? Or were you always thinking someone needs to actually do this for the industry?
Right. I mean, it's kind of a bit of both. I mean, I think I always did want to share it with others. I first had the idea when I was thinking of conference proposals in the 2021 cycle a few years ago. And I sort of approached that in two different ways. I'm either trying to think of something I'm already an expert on that I can, share with other people, or I'm looking for kind of gaps either in my own kind of knowledge, or maybe I see a gap in the industry. And I felt like this kind of was both. And it was really interesting to me. So I thought, well, maybe this will make a good conference session. I could kind of try it out and see what people think about it and get some input. So I did that at MTNA 2021 or 2022, I can't remember. And very quickly in that process, I'm kind of a systems person. So I was like, okay, how do I create this in a way that like is accessible, but also scalable? Because like there's so many things you could do with this idea. So that's how it was born.
And you're about to go to the NCKP. I think you've got a booth and stuff. I see. In fact, I think I connected with you because I saw your posts about you were talking about your ideas for your booth and how do I do this and what should I do? And so you all set?
I'm all set. Yeah, it's going to be a blast. I really believe in like immersive world building when it comes to exhibit booths. And I'm not selling anything, but I thought it'd be fun for people to get to know it just sort of in the exhibit hall. So I have this whole ridiculous expedition planned, and I think it's going to be fun. I have 12 other exhibitors who are taking part in it with me, and we're really bringing a scene to NCKP.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, for those who don't know, and I didn't know until I sort of did some research, you actually ran the NCKP events over 2 or 4 years or something like that for Francis Clark, right?
That's true. Yeah, I was directing the conference, and it was such a fun time. I love event planning. It's one of my favorite things. But I am looking forward to kind of being there just as an attendee this time, because when you're working it, you don't have time to enjoy really any of what's actually happening. So it'll be a new experience to be there. Just
For those who haven't been, I have to say that the NCKP. So we're talking about the National Conference on Keyboard Pedagogy. It is a mouthful. Happens every 2 years in July in Lombard, Chicago, Illinois, and it was the first conference in America that I spoke at in 2013, I think it would have been. And it really changed it was a real sort of shift for me in my career and my ability to reach more people and things like that. So I'm always very thankful. I have a very soft spot for Sam Holland and the whole crew who put that together. Ryan Green at that time as well.
Oh my gosh, love Ryan.
Fantastic. Yeah, such a great conference. So if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're looking for a conference to go to, particularly if you're in America, then really head over to this and go and experience your expedition.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I hope you're going to share some photos and videos of what you've created.
I will. I'm hoping it'll be a big splash. So
it's obviously grown a fair bit from when you first started. What does it include now? What does the Piano Method Navigator sort of include now?
Yeah, the first tool that I created when I was thinking about this was the transition guide, which, still exists on the website and is about to get a real big upgrade, kind of in advance of NCKP 2025. But that tool sort of came from a very specific problem that I was having, which is how do I transition a student who is new to my studio but has, been having lessons beforehand? How do I transition them into sort of my method of choice when they're coming from a method that maybe I don't know very well? Like, how do I place them? Where do they go? And I was like, oh, maybe I could create a tool that gives some clear pathways from method to method. But even in that phrasing, you can kind of see some of that bias that I had before, right? I'm like, there is a method book that they will use, and it will be this one, and I just need to know how to get them there. And I kind of realized it through that process. I was like, oh, you know what? Actually, this tool could be really helpful for all of my students. It was this like aha moment in my teaching, actually, and for the tool of the next best step for my student might not be the next book or even the next page. And how can I make something that helps other teachers navigate that kind of scary proposition? Because then now you're not like within kind of the safe framework anymore. So it kind of started as this transition tool, and then it became this tool for creative, like responsive teaching. And then once I started thinking in that way, I had all these other ideas for things like for ways that you could look at method books to kind of make those decisions. So now there's their transition guide. There's a searchable concept index, which on the website kind of explains how that's helpful. But essentially, it's all of the data that I have, and you could just search like eighth notes, and then you can see in every method book, like where is that introduced. There's a series of concept maps, which I was kind of thinking in terms of my own students of like, okay, this student, maybe struggles with rhythm, but they're doing okay with other things. Is there a method book that moves a little bit more slowly through rhythm concepts, but they could still advance in a book and feel, they're progressing and they're learning other things? So I made these maps so that you could kind of compare based on category, whether it's rhythm or note introduction or, chords or scales or like kind of more technique sort of things like that, how different method books approach those things and what the pacing is. So you can kind of like figure out, which one might be most helpful for your student. And then most recently, I've been adding sort of these one-page overviews because I realized, wow, I'm amassing a lot of method books. It might be helpful to kind of have snapshots of like, what is the tone? What is the reading approach? What is the kind of repertoire they have? Like, kind of top level things so that you get a sense of like, oh, that kind of fits with the way that I want to teach, or maybe it doesn't. And then I also have a blog that I've started this summer, which will be kind of like a lot of the things we've been talking about today, but also there's a lot of random kind of nerdy stuff that I think actually is kind of helpful that I've noticed just from kind of being in all of these method books.
Yeah, you should
I'll
be
write
writing about it. Yes.
Some of those things as well. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. You must write or video record or something, because you'll be having all these thoughts and realizations, and the best way to get it out is just, write about it so you can document it. Yeah, I think that's great. So what method books are included now, and what are you kind of planning to add next?
Yeah, so the original kind of 4 that I had were Alfred's, Faber, Music Tree, and Bastion. Apologize for not saying the full names, but there are many. And by the end of this summer, hopefully by NCKP, but definitely by the end of the summer, I'll also add the John Thompson books, Hal Leonard's Student Piano Library, the Alfred's Premier Piano Course, because I currently have the basic, the Lang Method, Music for Little Mozarts, Piano Partners, Piano Pronto, the Essential Piano Technique. I think that's all of them. As I said, I'm working with Music Moves for piano as well, and hoping to do some similar work with other less traditional methods like Piano Safari and things like that kind of on the horizon. So yeah, I've done a lot of work on the behind the scenes, but like getting it all on the website is a whole other workflow to get.
I'm exhausted just hearing about it. I think your inclusion of John Thompson is is actually going to be quite instructive because you will be able to see how different it actually is. Because my feeling is it's pretty, like I personally wouldn't use it. It is quite old school, but it's still published and it's still sold. So people are still using it. And so I would be really interested to be able to see, okay, how different actually is it? And what is crucially different? So I'm glad you've included that one as well as something like the Faber's fairly modern, just to be able to.
It's so interesting. And I think it's also really important to represent things people are using because, basic learning thing, right? We learn based on what we already know. And so I think having the reference point of like, okay, I really know this method. Here's how it's described on Piano Method Navigator. Here are things it emphasizes, whatever, is really helpful. And then understanding, okay, now I can kind of see like, oh, the Lang Lang method, totally different than John Thompson, but it's in the same language. So I can kind of connect those dots in my head. So I'm hoping it'll be helpful in that way.
Fantastic. I really look forward to sort of seeing as this develops. I think it's going to be quite the, what's the word? I mean, it's obviously a passion project for you, but it's going to be quite interesting just to see how it emerges and develops over the next few years, I guess. So why don't we wrap things up? I'd be interested, do you have sort of 2 or 3 tips for teachers with all this experience that you have about using method books in their teaching? What would you say?
Yes. Number 1, I would say, this is cheesy. I'm going to initialize something. ABP. Always be planning. I think one thing I have noticed in myself is that when I know a method book really well, it's really easy to become lax on lesson planning because I'm thinking, I can quote to you the next page of this book. Like, I know this so well.
And I know where the kid's going to mix up. I know what I need to teach. Yeah.
I can sing to you the teacher duet if you want me to, like, I know everything about it. And so I get really lax sometimes on like student-specific lesson planning. But I think really good student-centered teaching starts with a good lesson plan. So that's just my encouragement to teachers and to myself. And then...
What was the acronym? Always be planning, ABP.
Always ABP.
From ABR.
From ABR. Right. And then number 2 is another thing I just try to tell myself because, sometimes these things can get, monotonous if you're teaching out of the same method book, page after page, year after year. So I always tell myself to stay curious about the books, even if I know them really well, about the repertoire, about myself, about my students, obviously. And I think one of the big reasons I try to remember that is not just to keep myself entertained, if you will, but I think if you're curious, your students learn curiosity through you. And curiosity is the start of like truly independent and engaged learning. So keep telling myself to stay curious. Number 3, oh boy, you should use pianomethodnavigator.com. It'll change your life. No.
I was just going to say, well, you better give us the website. So go on then.
Yeah, pianomethodnavigator.com is the website. And there's a fledgling Instagram account that doesn't have anything on it yet, but it will very soon. So pianomethodnavigator.com.
Thank you so much for, well, one, being on the show, AVR, but also for putting this out there for free. Hello, this is hours and hours of your work and your experience, and it's all out there for free. So teachers listening, go have a look if this is of interest. I think, I don't know, maybe we're just nerds and no one else really cares this much.
Right,
but
I thought about that. I was like,
am I weird? Yeah.
It's kind of niche,
Nicola Canton's obviously on our page as well.
She's in our club.
Yes.
Anyone can be in our club.
Yeah, come and join our club so we don't feel like nerds.
Right, exactly. Oh, boy.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I think it's going to be a really great resource for everybody. I hope NCKP goes really, really well, and look forward to keeping in touch. Make sure you keep us up in the loop with how things develop, okay?
Yeah, I definitely will. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show. I hope you enjoyed today's interview with ABR and you'll go and check out her Piano Method Navigator. Definitely worth having a look at if you are someone who is always on the lookout for new methods, better approaches, different things to do. That's why you're listening to this show, I'm sure, anyway. So hope you can go and check it out and that this episode has been helpful to you. That's the end of the show for this week. I'm Tim Topham and you've been listening to the Topcast. Can't wait to connect with you again this time next week. Bye-bye, everyone. How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today. If you enjoy this show and want to hear more of our work, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening today. For links and resources mentioned in this episode, visit us at topmusic.co/podcast or check out the show notes. I'm Tim Topham. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy your week ahead, and I'll catch you next time.